with Todd Miranda, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate how to dynamically create and execute a storyboard for a WPF application. So let's begin in Microsoft Visual Studio 2008, and we're going to choose File, New, Project. We'll choose a WPF application project, and we'll name it accordingly, and we'll target the .NET Framework 3.5, and we'll choose OK. So this will create our default project for us and open up our window1.xaml file. And we'll go ahead and start working in the XAML file and lay out our UI that we're going to then animate with a dynamically generated storyboard. So to make this, while we want to keep the example simple, we'll kind of make it a little bit more realistic. We'll do kind of a menu concept, so that maybe you have a menu and you want the menu items in that menu to do some activity when the user rolls over them, so that they get some kind of visual indication that they've rolled over that particular item in the menu. So let's just start in our grid with a border element, and we'll just set a height of 75, we'll do a width of 250, and then we'll just do a border brush of something like, maybe we'll just do this Alice Blue, and then we'll do a border thickness of 2, we'll set a corner radius of 5, and that looks pretty good. Alright, so that just gives us some kind of a rounded edged border around our menu elements. And now we'll build one of the menu elements that we've got in our menu. So we'll do a grid, and we'll just set a margin in it just to give us a little bit of spacing around our menu items. And then inside of our grid, let's do a rectangle. And this rectangle, we'll go ahead, first thing we need to do is probably give it a name, and we'll just arbitrarily kind of call this rect1, and then we'll do radius x equals 5, radius y equals 5. That gives us again kind of a rounded edge on our rectangle. And then we'll do a background or a fill on our rectangle. And the fill on this rectangle will be, we'll just do burly wood, and then that looks pretty good. Inside of a rectangle, now we're going to do a render transform. So we'll do a rectangle dot render transform, and inside there we're just going to do a scale transform. Now the reason why we're doing this is we want to slightly increase the size of the menu when you hover over it, and then decrease it when your mouse leaves that menu item. So the easiest way to do that is to do a render transform, where you can do a scale transform and scale it up and then scale it back down. But initially, remember, we want our scale X to be 1, which means there is no increase or decrease in scale. It's just a factor of 1. And same for scale Y. We want that just to be 1. So we're going to animate this to be larger than 1. There, that way it'll expand. So we've got that rectangle. We need to add another rectangle, and the reason we're going to add another rectangle is, for a little bit of more of a realistic kind of gradient effect, a little bit of a sheen to our button. But instead of creating that rectangle just from scratch, we'll copy this one, which means we need to add a few more properties here. Let's go ahead and set a width on this to be 45 and a height to be 45, and that way we've got a kind of it's actually going to be a square rectangle, so it won't be a rectangle. And then last but not least, since we're doing a scale transform on this, we really kind of want to put a render transform origin on here, and that's going to be 0.5. And what that means is that we want the origin of our render transform to be right in the center of the object. That way it'll expand in all directions. It'll scale out from the center. So we're going to copy that rectangle, paste it, and we'll change the name of this one to rect2, and pretty much everything is going to be a little bit different. And we do have a render transform on here, but we also are going to do rectangle.fill, and this fill is going to be a linear gradient brush with a start point equal to 0, 0, which puts it up in the upper left hand corner, and end point of 1, 1, which puts it down in the lower right hand corner. So we're going to get a vertical transient or vertical gradient going from the top left to the bottom right. And then we'll just do a gradient stop, set of 0, a color, and we want the color to be white, but we're gonna use so we can use a little bit of a transparency. Start off with do another one of those. It will go out, and what I mean by that, let's do 0.9. We'll do CC, and then we'll come in and we'll do like a 3.3 as an alpha channel, and we'll come in and do 0, 0, and this is just hexadecimal numbers if you're unfamiliar with this. So FF would be 256, so you can look up hexadecimal numbers to see what kind of format. Okay, so that gets our fill and our render transform. So let's run this, make sure this is the way we want it to be. Alright, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. We've got our border around there. We've got our nice little gradient going in our button. We could assume this might be some kind of a button element. The only other thing that I'll say we'll do is let's set the horizontal alignment to left and the vertical alignment to center, and then we'll set those same properties on our other rectangle so that they sit right on top of one another, which is the goal. And perhaps on our border we'll make this just blue so that it stands out a little bit better. Alright, so there's our menu item, and obviously we'd have more than one of these going across our application if we were using this as a real menu. So now let's go to our code behind, and we're going to respond to a couple of events. So on our grid we want to respond to the mouse enter event, and we'll just enter to enter a new event handler, and we're going to do mouse leave event equal event handler and hit implement that for us. And then let's go to the code behind, and here is where we're going to create our storyboards dynamically. So the reason you'd want to do this is perhaps you're generating your XAML dynamically, and in that case you may not have any XAML to begin with to add a storyboard in XAML. So you're going to have to generate your storyboard on the back end, and maybe you want to generate your storyboard, start it, and you want to keep it around, so you want to just get disposed, and that's kind of what we're looking at by generating our storyboard dynamically. So we're going to begin by creating a storyboard, and we'll just call that SB, and that equals new storyboard. Now notice that storyboard is not highlighted in indicating that it recognizes this type, and that's because we haven't added the correct using statement. And since we may not remember what using statement it is, we'll right click on that class, we'll do resolve and do using the using statement. It'll add it for us up into our using statements. Right there, it added it for us, and now we can utilize all those classes. So if you didn't know you could do that, that's a real easy way to add a using statement if you're missing a using statement to be able to use a class. Alright, so we're going to use a double animation using keyframes, double animation using keyframes 1 equals new double animation using keyframes, and this is going to have a begin time. And remember, this is a time span. When we're generating this dynamically, we can't just do 0 like we could if we were in XAML. We actually have to specify this as a time span, and time span starting at 0. So we'll also set the target name and the target property. Now, in order to set these, we're going to use the set value, because these are dependency properties. So we're going to do a set value, and not only is it a dependency property, but it's an property on our double animation using keyframes. So this is going to be storyboard dot, and obviously know our name of our element is rect1. Now we could have this come in as sender, so we could come in here and we could do sender.name, pass sender in to our target name property, and that would allow us to target name based on the element that was calling the grid.mouseCenter. If we had multiple of these menu items, that would be a good way to do that. Alright, so now let's set the target property, and this is going to be set value storyboard.target property. And notice the syntax here for dependency properties when using set value. It's the property name followed by property, and that's really just convention. So here's another place where things differ a little bit from what we would do in XAML. So in XAML, we would come in and we would simply say our path to our property that we want to animate. Well, that actually gets transformed into a property path. So when we do the set value and we're creating our storyboard dynamically, we need to do new property path, and we're going to specify in the property path the full path to our property. So we could come in here, we could do rectangle dot render transform dot, and then we come in here and do scale transform dot scale x, and that would work for us. Because one thing to keep in mind is the parens. The parentheses, effectively everything within the parentheses is kind of compacted down into an actual property. So we want to get the object that is the render transform property on rectangle and set its scale transform dot scale x property. So we can do it this way, but we can and just simply do render transform dot scale, and the property path will find that property directly off of the rectangle specification. So that pretty much gets our double animation using keyframes. So I'm going to use a spline double keyframe. One equals new spline double keyframe. And the reason we're using a spline, you could actually specify a key spline if you wanted to do some real fancy interpolation between in. So sdkf1 dot keytime dot from seconds, and we just want, and then sdkf1 dot I want it to go to 0.2. Remember, we had it originally set to 1. We're going to set that using keyframes dot keyframe, and finally storyboard dot so we've created the created the spline double keyframe to go in it, added them, and then added them to storyboard. We'll go in here and change everything to, this is going to be 2, and the reason why I'm doing this is double animation using keyframes to do the so that looks good. It gets us our scale X and we also need double animation using keyframes, and don't think this is any more than what you would do if you were working in XAML. You have to create all these double animations using keyframes. This is going to target rect 2, and we're just changing everything so that we've got something a little bit more meaningful here. We're going to have 4 of these, 2, 4, and we'll change this back to scale X. And then we'll copy this as well. Make this rect 2, that's correct. So here's a 4. Change these all to 4. That should be 3. 4, 4. Okay. So that's great. So we're going to expand the X and the Y. We're scale X and Y up to 1.2 on both rectangles, the shadow rectangle as well as the main rectangle. And then once we've added all those to our storyboard, we'll simply do sb.begin and specify this. Now the reason what you pass here is an element which exists in the same name scope as the element that you want to animate. All right, and name scopes in WPF effectively allow us a way to put elements within a scope so that we don't get name conflicts between elements that are in different scopes. You can look up more on name scopes. It's really kind of outside the scope of what we're doing here, but effectively what this is an element which is in the same name scope as the element you want to animate. And since the element we want to animate is in the same name scope, we can just do this and that should work for us. And that's all we have to do. There's our storyboard for our mouse enter. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to copy this down to our mouse leave, and pretty much everything is the same here except that we want the value to go back to 1. So we're going to animate back down to a scale of 1. So this is the shrinking animation. We have the enlarging and then the shrinking animation. So let's build this. See if we have any errors. Build succeeded, and let's run it. Alright, so here's our element. When we mouse over, notice we get the expansion, and when we mouse out, it shrinks back down. Now notice that we've got a little bit of an edge here, and it looks like because we're not expanding correctly along the y-axis. So let's go take a look at that. And that would be our rect 2. And it's because I didn't change this to scale Y, so we were just doing scale X twice. And we'll make that same change down here and run it again. Alright, so there we can see a really nice menu type effect if you wanted to create a menu like this and still generate your storyboards dynamically, which means that you can set the target name, target property dynamically, even though you could still do that at runtime with a storyboard that's in XAML. But this shows you how you can dynamically generate your storyboard, a few of the things that you need to get around when you do that, and how simple it is to create that storyboard to animate multiple elements in your page, and you can do all that at runtime.